Hi there and welcome to part 5 of our little chat on dutching, specifically dutching horse racing. Today I'm going to move on to using this website, Napchecker.com, as the basis of our selection process. Now last year I did a whole range of posts and videos showing the results from doing this. Today I'm actually going to show you the actual selection process itself. But one thing I should flag up to you, however, is unless you're a fee-paying member of this website, the tips aren't available until 1 p.m. And so we may actually miss the first race at Uttoxeter. The second one is a Forerunner race, so I'm probably going to miss that one out as well. So we'll probably end up jumping to Wingfield 123 as our first race. But I'll let you see the selection process in any case. But I'm also going to move on to let you see what we can do with sort of a little variation on a theme, as it were. So I'm just waiting for 1 o'clock to come so I can refresh this page and let's see what we've got at Uttoxeter. As I say, we might not have enough time to actually put in the bets on this particular one. I'll be doing all this in simulation mode as per usual when I'm doing these videos. If you want to implement these, you'll obviously ultimately have to try them in real mode, but do so for smaller stakes, please. Right, we must be near enough 1 o'clock. Let me just see if we can refresh this. There we go. Okay, so it's the Uttoxeter, 1 o'clock we need to look at first of all. And the basic idea is actually very simple. You just scan down the list and see how many times each horse is selected. So you can see from here, Western Sapphire is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sea of Charm is 1, 2, 3, 4. The other ones are only mentioned briefly. So the general rule of thumb, when I was doing all these videos before, is at least one pick has to be selected by at least 5 of the tipsters.
This market is now in play.
And there's the market's just gone in place. So we've missed this particular race, but that gives me the opportunity to describe what I'm doing. So you're looking for any selection that's been picked 5 times. Now in that situation, your next pick can be selected 3 times. Okay? If, however, there's no pick being picked 5 times, look for 4, but your next selection has to have been picked 4 times as well. Now in the case when you have 5 picks, if the next 2 runners are 3 picks, they can also be selections. And you can decide when you look at the market if one of them's too high in odds to get involved or whether you want to skew your Dutch and so on and so forth. But that's essentially the basic rules. And what you'll generally find, usually, is that the more runners selected by the tipsters, the more likelihood it is to be the favourite or very prominent in the market. Goes without saying, really, because lots of people follow these tipsters. The other thing to flag up, of course, is that we are looking to make selections with a view to trading out in running. We are not looking for winners. That's not to say that some of these tipsters, on occasion, won't find a winner. But we're not interested in that. All we're interested in, or all we're hoping for, is that the work that these tipsters have done are going to identify horses that will shorten in price in running. That's what we want. We're not interested in winners. Okay, that's the most important thing. Lots of people, understandably, don't like following tipsters for a whole variety of reasons. Very few tipsters have a particularly good record. But that's the reasoning behind coming in here. You're letting other people do the work and make your selections easier. You'll typically find, for example, Irish Times, Captain Johnny almost always goes for a high-priced runner. Almost always. That's one thing to be aware of. The other thing is, although if I can scroll up here, you've got Irish racing as well to choose from, you'll quite often find that there's very few tipsters actually doing those. So the vast majority of the newspapers don't bother with the Irish racing. This technique is primarily for UK racing only, I would suggest. Now there's actually another way that you can go and look at these tips, and I would argue that it's actually easier. So rather than having to scroll down here and count all the various selections, instead of going to this page, today's tips, go to today's racing. And then you get the same tables, but rather than them being organized by tipster, they are organized by the runner. And you'll now see that each of these runners now has all the tips listed. So it's very easy to see which one is the most popular runner and the next popular runner just by looking at the listing here. So you can see that Western Sapphire, Sea of Charm are the two picks. Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your auntie. Very quick to do. Okay, so those would be the two picks as far as a Dutch is concerned on this particular race. However, the 1 o'clock. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I was looking at a different race because that race had already gone off. When I switched to Uttoxeter, it automatically showed me the next race. I beg your pardon. So there we go. Parkhill Dancer and Hurakai Golf would have been the two picks, but because Parkhill Dancer was quite short priced, in all likelihood, this wouldn't have been a pick. Keeping in mind what I was saying about the staking when I'm doing Dutching, which I mentioned in previous videos. If I was to do a Dutch here based on SP, so what is it? 2.29, and the other one was the second one, right? 2.29 and 6.4. Switch off live OS there. So that'd be 2.29 and 6.4. You can see there for a £100 stake, the profit and loss would be £68. So generally speaking, I would tend to shy away from something like that. That's not to say that these can't be profitable. I'm just saying that it's just personal preference, and I can't advise you one way or the other simply because I don't have the data, because I've not been doing them. One might argue that the market, because of the market odds that these things are at, the market fancies these runners, and so is there a higher likelihood of them shortening enough in price for you to get your target profit? Potentially, but I tend to shy away from them as a matter of course. And you can actually see from here, it looks like neither of those runners would have been successful. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you there is when the return for the Dutch, if you were to let that Dutch run through to its conclusion, isn't high enough. In other words, I don't think the value is there, and so I do tend to shy away from them. But there is a little caveat to that that gives you another option, as it were, which I'll come to either later in this video, depending how long it ends up being, or in a supplementary video or later in the series. Okay, so that's essentially the selection process in a nutshell. As I say, the next race is a non-event as far as I'm concerned. So let's skip to the one at Wingfield at 23 minutes past 1. So again, just jump into Napchecker, and of course this type of thing can be done fairly in advance, or you can do it just before the start of each race. And of course you can do it the night before or early in the morning if you're a fee-paying subscriber. Now I'm sure this isn't the only website that collates the tips from a number of sources. Just that I'm using this one simply because I've been familiar with this particular website for a long time. If you come across any others, by all means feel free to use those. Okay, the Wingfield 123, and we can see that the favoured runners are Demby and Buxt 2. So again, typical, you'll find that the most popular tip from all the tipsters tends to be the favourite. So that's Buxt 2 and Demby. So they would be the two runners concerned. So again, we just click on the Dutching option. Let me just move that out of the way so we can see the grid. So it would be those two, and you can see again it's lower than the £100 stake I'd be using. So this again wouldn't necessarily be an option. Now we're 14 minutes away, so those odds might change, so we'll leave it for the moment. But the possibility exists that we can perhaps skew that Dutch a little bit to squeeze us out, especially when we're quite close to the £100 trigger point anyway. So let me just pause the video for a moment now, and we'll come back nearer the off. Actually, now when I think about it, rather than waste time waiting for this race to come, let's take the opportunity of looking at the next races as well. Again, that might not be a race, but let's have a look at it anyway. That was the 1:30 at Warwick. So again, we just quickly go to Napchecker, click on Warwick, and you can see virtually everybody has gone for Stolen River with 2 on. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. I'm going to call him Bob. So I'm going to note down Stolen River, and this isn't, sorry, Stolen Silver, I should say, and Bob. And what I'm going to do is do a variation on a theme on this particular race. More of that when that race comes along. But this is, or would be, potentially questionable. So I may not necessarily get involved in this, but it's a good race to let me show you a potential option available to you. Let's have a look at the next, Uttoxeter, the 135. Okay. Again, quickly go back to Napchecker. So you can see if there's a gap in the racing, you can very quickly scan through a lot of these. And we've got Western Sapphire. So again, I'm just taking a note of those. And Sea of Charm. But I'm also, in this particular case, since Solo Chana has got 2 picks, I'm going to take a little note of that one and keep that in reserve when that time comes. It gives me an option to see what's going to happen with the Dutch. So we're looking primarily at Western Sapphire, Sea of Charm, and then potentially also Solo Chana. Okay, so we can switch back to Wingfield. Got a few minutes still. So we'll just pull up the Dutching tool. So again, in that time since I first did it, you can see a return has come up a little bit more. So let's just keep an eye on that, and we'll come back when it's nearer the off. Okay, you can see that we are a minute before the off, and Marion's Boy, third one on the list there, has come in price, which has forced Dembe to drift somewhat in the market, which has had the effect of making our profit and loss at that a little bit higher. It's still kind of marginal, to be perfectly honest, but I'd be happy to take this. There are a couple of things that you can do, of course. You could ask for slightly higher odds, so for 1 tick higher, that would put us over my personal preference. Alternatively, of course, you could ask to green up slightly less. Now, generally speaking, in a 2-runner Dutch, my target profit is £25. I have used higher options in the past, but I tend to gravitate back to £25. You could, when the profit and loss goes below that, ask for slightly less than the £25 normal profit target in my case. But certainly, if this was to drop below 90, I wouldn't get involved. Although there is another option available to you that hopefully I'll be able to cover in this video, but or certainly in an additional one. And I've forgotten to put the Dutch in because I'm too busy talking. So we'll just pop it in and running. Normally I would have that submitted before the off. Again, I'm not going to put in an automated green up process that I normally would in this case, because what I want you to do is just get a feel for the types of green up positions that you could take. As I say, I normally go for about £25, but it's really up to you. You need to decide what your risk and reward targets are and what you're particularly comfortable with. So what to do is, if you're going to try and use this particular technique, do so in simulation mode for a while, get a feel for how the profit and losses appear, and where you can or when you want to get out for a profit or whatever sort of level of loss that you want to get out. So we'll just let the races run through to their conclusions when I'm doing these today, and just to give you a feel. Now keep in mind, what we're looking for is runners who are shortening in price. So when we're using the Napchecker one, although these guys are tipping for winners, that's not what we're looking for. All we're interested in is something that's shortening in price. Now in this particular case, of course, one of the options that you have available to you, which I don't tend to use, but you do have the option of trading out early on Demby, for example, because he doesn't look as if he's going to be doing it. So we're what, at £28 or thereabouts. Now we've spent £55 on Demby as part of the Dutch. So if we traded out of him early, we would save some of that £55. However, one of the reasons, and there we've got £50 there, so my green up for £25 would have been successful. You can see Demby has now switched around and has come in and looks like he's going to win. And that's why I don't trade out early, because that happens so many times. And you can see these two are hammer and tongs with each other, and Bucks 2 has come through to win. Okay, so that would have been a successful trade. Keeping in mind, we're not looking for the winner, but certainly the tipsters, or the majority of the tipsters, got that one right. Good, let's move on to the next one. Now this was the Forerunner race. So let me run through what we were looking at. Now if you recall, wrong tab, if you recall, the selections were Stolen Silver and Bob. Now you can see we're certainly below the 90, and this wouldn't be a pick. What you can do in this situation though is a variation on a theme, and you can use the variable profit ratios option and adjust this so that most of your money goes on Stolen Silver, and the one that where there's a potential threat, you can set up insurance. And in this particular case, you'll see that we'll end up spending £10.42 on Bob. And so if he was to go on and win and we didn't manage to trade out, the race would be scratched. We still run the risk of a full stake being lost on the other two, of course, but hopefully Stolen Silver will come in. Now, this is not a race I would like to get involved in, to be perfectly honest, but we'll run through it anyway to let you see what happens by using this variable profit option, just to give you an idea. So essentially what we're doing is we think Stolen Silver is going to be the main threat, or the preferred runner, and certainly that's what the tipsters are thinking. So we're putting most of our money on there, and we're just putting in a smaller stake on Bob to cover us just in case he runs a blinder. Okay, so let me just pause the video and we'll hopefully put in the bet before the start of the race this time. So you can see here that even with this skewing, where we're only providing an insurance cover on Bob, the potential profit for Stolen Silver is still less than my overall stake. So this wouldn't be a Dutch for me. I wouldn't get involved in this race. But let's follow it just to see what happens so that you are aware of the options available to you in such circumstances. Right, so 8 seconds or so to go. Let's just submit that. And again, sit back and see what happens. Okay, looks like we're just about off, although it hasn't suspended yet. It's a bit strange. There we go.
This market is now in play.
Okay, so once again, just keep an eye on this. As I say, I would normally have an automated rule, so I'd normally choose a green up for £25. Even when I've got a skewed Dutch like this, I'm essentially relying on the favoured runner to do the business for me and the outsider to protect me. Doesn't always work, of course. But as I said, this would not have been a bet I would get involved in. But it's what, 2 miles, 4 furlongs, 2.5 miles. So this is going to take 5 minutes, this race, anyway. So there's plenty of time for either of those horses to do the business for us. But keep an eye on the overall green up button and the figure contained therein. Keep in mind, I've said it in the past lots of times with Dutching in running, that I do not read up at any point in the race. I've tried doing it in the past, and my experience is that when I end up doing that, I'll often find that one of my runners goes on to win the race, or at least runs well enough to have hit the green out position if I hadn't traded out for a red. So I tend not to do it. I don't like it. It's very frustrating when that happens. And I would suggest that if losing your overall stake is an issue, then perhaps you should drop the value of the value of your stake and use smaller stakes when doing this. Again, personal preference. I can't advise you one way or the other. That's something that you need to decide for yourself. But generally speaking, it's not something that I would do. So as you can see, for the first half of this race, we've been looking at getting on for £30–40 red up position. And yet there's plenty of time for the race for any of our selections to make a move. I should point out I don't have any pictures. I'm not watching the race. I don't have any commentary on, so I have absolutely no idea other than what's happening with the odds that you're seeing on the screen just now. And that's fairly common for me. I tend not to watch the racing. I don't have any subscription to at the races or anything like that. I occasionally listen to the William Hill radio commentary, but that can be at least 20 seconds behind the event on the track. So from a point of view of using it as an information source for trading live, it's not viable, to be perfectly honest. I only use it just as a general information as to how the race is going. But it's not something I would rely on. So at the moment, you can see that Stolen Silver doesn't look to be doing much for us, and we're running at a much higher loss than I'd like. But you can see Bob is coming along nicely. He just needs to keep going. Yeah, it looks like the favourite is potentially a false favourite. Okay, so Stolen Silver is certainly out of it now. Bob gave us some hope, but he's hanging in there, but it looks like he's going to be beaten as well. Knight of Dubai has essentially dominated this one, I think. Okay, so that's an example of what you can do in terms of skewing, but as I said right at the very beginning, this would not be a race I would ever get involved in. It just didn't feel right from a dutching point of view, and that's maybe something that you need to become familiar with. Oh, and right at the last, Bob has pinched it. Well, that was fortunate. Well, there's an absolutely excellent example of having a skewed Dutch to provide you with some insurance. So that would be a scratched result. Couldn't have planned that better. Hey ho. Okay, let's move on to the next one. And we're actually before time, so I'm not going to have much time to do this. What was it? Western Sapphire. And what was the other one? Sea of Charm. So 363. Again, the other one, what I was going to do is you can do a little insurance bet on that one. That was the third one that had 2 picks. So if we choose that and click on submit, we'll do the same sort of thing. So a nice return there. It was up at over 300 if we hadn't chosen Solo Chana as a insurance bet. But essentially the same thing. I would do a green up option of £25 on this one. Keep in mind that the more picks you have in your Dutch, I try to limit it to 2, 3 at the most. When I'm skewing like this, I am prepared to go for more selections, but that tends to be on the bigger field races. And but I do tend to green up for less of a target profit. So when I've got 3 selections, I'd be tempted to drop my target profit to 20 or even 15. But because I'm skewing, so I'm only using Solo Chana as an insurance here, and the returns on the other 2, as you can see there, £230. I'd be quite happy to go for £25 in there, keeping in mind that Western Sapphire and Sea of Charm were popular picks. Okay, so we've got most of them on Western Sapphire, then 3 picks on Sea of Charm, and because there's only 2 on Solo Chana, that's why I'm deciding to use the skewed technique, variable profit technique, to provide some insurance on that particular runner. So what I'll do is I'll let this race run through to its conclusion as well, and I think I'll draw the video to a close after that, simply because it's getting on a little bit too long. There's lots of other things I'd like to do, but essentially what I've done is covered the selection process if you were to use the Napchecker website. The important thing to remember is that whilst these tipsters are putting forward tips for winners, they're tipping winners or trying to. We're not necessarily interested in that. We're looking for runners that are simply going to run well in the market and drop in price in running. And you can see there, bang, I already hit the target profit if I was greening out. So that was excellent. So you can see even if that one, this old Chana one, if it isn't or it's an insurance bet, it can still take part in the green up process if it's still running well, because clearly there's still some money on it. There's £28 on Soul Chana there. So that would be a comfortable green up point as well. And keeping in mind, of course, when you're doing this, that you can also incorporate those other options I showed before. Not so much in this race since it's a novice, so there's no form to go on as such. So this wouldn't necessarily allow you to look at the past 3 runs it's had and use that technique. And consequently, looking at the time form odds movement in running would be a bit of a no-go as well, simply because there isn't any form for these horses to go on. So you're relying on the experience of the tipsters within Napchecker, or specifically the papers that they're posted in, to be able to make your decisions. So you're relying on the experience of those tipsters and the knowledge that they have. in order to look for runners that will shorten in price. But keep in mind, you can use those other techniques that I've already shown you to help reinforce what you're trying to do. So what I'm going to do is just let this race run through, although I would have greened out a long time ago for a nice profit. We'll see how that one goes. And then we'll wrap the video up. Obviously, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. Subscribe, click the bell, do all those good things. It always helps the channel. And in the next installment, we'll start looking at using the pace maps on Racing TV. Again, I've done a series of videos on those, or showing you lots of posts of results there. And they had done moments as well. So that video will come, it's probably going to be in the middle of next week, given my shift rotas and so on. It won't be until then I have time to do them. So look out for that. In the meantime, as I say, if you've got any questions, put them down in the comments and I shall endeavour to answer them as soon as I can. Okay, so you can see from here, one of the popular pick, Western Sapphire, I think it was, if memory serves me correctly. Yeah. Western Sapphire looks like the one is going to go on and win. Granted, there's 15% of the race still to go. Now, of course, one could easily have done just a Dutch on these two. Certainly that's what the tips are showing. It's easy to say that, of course, and get a bigger profit. But we are trading out, so it's irrelevant, really. But that was another straightforward selection process using Napchecker.com. Okay, I'm going to finish it there. I'll catch you later, guys. Cheers.